So we've reached the final chapter of Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart by Nicholas Carr. We move now in this session into Chapter 10, Dr. Johnson's Rock. Graceland. It was a Sunday night, October 19, 1952, and Frank Walsh, a Long Island electrician who moonlighted as a security guard, was worn out. He headed upstairs to bed while the rest of his family, wife, mother-in-law, 5 kids, stayed down in the living room watching TV. They were engrossed in the latest episode of The Abbott and Costello Show, a new hit comedy airing on Channel 4, the local NBC affiliate. Walsh tossed and turned but couldn't fall asleep. The television was too loud, the laughter jarring. His irritation mounted, then turned to rage. He got up and grabbed the .38 Special he used in his guard job. Halfway down the stairs, the offending set came into view. He paused, took aim, and fired a bullet through the screen. Walsh's wife, furious, called the police. Officers arrived and confiscated the revolver, but they made no arrest. There's no law, he explained, against shooting one's own television. 2 days later, the New York Times ran a brief, tongue-in-cheek notice about the incident under the headline, "Obviously Self-Defense." The day after that, a Times columnist, Jack Gould, praised Walsh's public-spirited act. He called on the authorities to give the man his gun back. His work has barely started. The paper's coverage turned Walsh into a celebrity. Within a week, he appeared as a contestant on the popular primetime game show Strike It Rich. He won a TV. Can't make this stuff up, can you? To shoot a television set, Frank Walsh discovered, is not to strike a blow against media and its dominion. It's to merge into the televisual. It's to act as someone on TV would act. As the producers of Strike It Rich, not to mention the editors of the New York Times, immediately recognized, Walsh's shooting of his television was a made-for-media event. Outrageous, funny, violent, relatable. Flattened into a figure of amusement and funneled into the media flow, Walsh succeeded only in turning himself into content. His act lived on, though. Firing a gun at a television would become a cultural trope, replayed endlessly in books, movies, songs, cartoons, and, of course, television shows. Elvis Presley made a habit of shooting his TVs and burying the carcasses in a television graveyard behind Graceland. He would then go out and buy more sets. He kept upwards of a dozen televisions in various locations around his mansion, plugged in and broadcasting. In surrounding himself with screens, the king was a trailblazer. We all live in Graceland now. Saboteurs. Thanks to its lack of attachments, its promiscuous flexibility, mass media has always been resilient. It absorbs the criticisms directed at it even when they take the form of projectiles, turns them into programming, airs them, then distracts us from them with the next spectacle. Social media goes a step further. By encouraging an overheated style of rhetoric that breeds political polarization and governmental paralysis, it reduces the chances that it will be subjected to meaningful regulations or other legal controls. It's protected by the conditions of distraction and dysfunction that it fosters. Politicians go on social media to express their disdain for social media, then eye the like count. That's not to say reform is impossible. The European Union, which has been much less sanguine than the United States about jettisoning the secrecy of correspondence doctrine, regularly passes laws and regulations aimed at restraining social media platforms. The rules provide citizens with more control over the information they share and the information they receive. Europeans are able to opt out of data collection regimes, targeted advertising programs, and even, as of the summer of 2023, personalized news feeds. But the controls, however salutary, haven't really changed the way social media operates. The reason is simple. They haven't changed the behavior of most users. As surveys show, consumers have grown accustomed to trading personal information for tailored products and services. Few of them at this point are going to opt out of receiving content geared to their desires. Personalization has become central to people's experience of media and to the enjoyment they derive from it. For avid TikTokers, taking the For You out of the For You page would be tantamount to switching off a pleasure center in the brain. Strong engagement isn't only good for the platforms, users like it too. Antitrust actions against companies such as Google and Meta, which may be justified in economic terms, are also unlikely to change social media's workings. Technological process has an inertial force that rolls on independently of the maneuverings of the companies making money off it. While breaking up the tech giants or curbing their ability to enter into oligarchic alliances might well intensify competition and innovation in the internet industry, it's unlikely to push media off the technological path it's already on, a path that has been and will continue to be appealing to consumers and lucrative for companies. The point of antitrust prosecutions, argues Tim Wu, the Columbia law professor, is not to punish the big platforms, but to force them to make way for the next generation of technologists and their dreams. That sounds stirring until we remember that it's the dreams of technologists that got us into our current fix. The next wave of innovations, larger language models, more convincing chatbots, more efficient content generation and censorship systems, more precise eye trackers and body sensors, more immersive virtual worlds, faster everything, will only drive us further into the emptiness of hyperreality. The boldest and most creative of social media's would-be reformers, a small group of legal scholars and other academics, joined by a handful of rebel programmers, have a more radical plan. They call it frictional design. They believe the existing technological system needs to be dismantled and rebuilt in a more humanistic form. Pursuing an approach reminiscent of the machine-breaking strategy of the 19th century British Luddites, if without the violence, they seek, in effect, to sabotage existing social media platforms by reintroducing friction into their operations, throwing virtual sand into the virtual works. The relentless push to eliminate friction in the digital networked environment for the sake of efficiency, explained two of the movement's leading thinkers, Villanova's Brett Frischman and Harvard's Susan Benesch, in a 2023 article in the Yale Journal of Law and Technology, has imposed large hidden costs on society. A general course correction is needed, invoking the time, place, and manner restrictions that have long been imposed on public speech, the prohibition on using a megaphone on a neighborhood street in the middle of the night, say, or the requirement that protesters get a permit before marching through a city. Frischman and Benesch argue that legal restrictions can, in a similar way, be imposed on media software to encourage civil behavior and protect the general public interest. Unlike antitrust actions, privacy regulations, and opt-in requirements, which fail to address the rampant technosocial engineering of humans by digital network technologies, government-mandated design constraints would, they write, transform the digital architectures and interfaces that shape human interactions and behavior. The constraints would change social relations by, to once again draw on Cooley's terms, altering the mechanisms that determine how information flows and associations form. Many kinds of desirable inefficiencies have been proposed. Limits could be set on the number of times a message can be forwarded, or the number of people it can be forwarded to. The limits might become more stringent the more a message is shared. A delay of a few minutes could be introduced before a post appears on a platform, giving the person doing the posting time to reconsider its content and tone, and slowing down the pace of exchanges. A similar delay or a few added clicks could be imposed before a person is allowed to like or reply to someone else's post. A small fee might be required to broadcast a post or message to, say, more than 1,000 recipients. The fee might be increased for 10,000 recipients and again for 100,000. A broadcasting license might be required for any account with more than 250,000 followers or subscribers. Pop-up alerts could remind users of the number of people who might see a post or a message. Infinite scrolls, autoplay functions, and personalized feeds and advertisements could be banned outright. There's much to be said for the frictional design approach. It introduces values other than efficiency into media technology, and it would promote the construction of networks that, like the analog systems of old, encourage more deliberation and discretion on the part of viewers and listeners. If code is law, as the legal scholar Lawrence Lessig argued years ago, then shouldn't the public's values and interests be taken into account in the formulation of software that shapes how society works? We have speed bumps on roads to slow people down and safeguard the public. Why not on the net? The approach also has precedence in recent experiments undertaken by the platforms themselves. In 2020, some Twitter users began seeing a pop-up asking, "Want to read the article first?" when they were about to retweet an article they hadn't read. The pop-up stirred some irritation. "Who made you God?" one user tweeted. But they did seem to have an effect, increasing the likelihood that people would at least glance at an article before sharing it. 2 years later, Twitter tested a similar pop-up to deter abusive language in tweets. It too seemed to have an effect, with users canceling or revising about a third of the flagged messages. Apple and Instagram have introduced algorithmic interventions aimed at curbing the exchange of nude photos among minors. Teenage users of Apple's Messages and Instagram's direct messaging service are warned before sending or receiving messages that include nude images, and the images themselves are sometimes automatically blurred. But while frictional design may help curb certain well-defined types of undesirable online behavior, it is likely to prove as futile as Frank Walsh's gunplay when it comes to changing how social media operates. Unlike traditional time, place, and motion laws, which don't affect the day-to-day lives of most people, changes to the basic workings of social media would affect pretty much everyone all at once. Although the frictional design proposals focus on regulating how technological systems work rather than on what people say, they would still raise free speech and free press concerns. Many people, even among the growing number who would like to see stiffer controls placed on platform companies, would rebel against what they see as patriarchal overreach or nanny state meddling. Others would object to the government imposing a single set of values on the general public's means of communication and entertainment. Many would ask whether politicians and bureaucrats can be trusted to meddle with software without mucking everything up. Would every shift in the political winds bring sudden and confusing alterations to the way apps work? The biggest obstacle to adding friction to communication, though, is likely to be the habits of social media users themselves. The history of technological progress shows that once people adapt to greater efficiency in any practice or process, reductions in efficiency, whatever the rationale, feel intolerable. The public is rarely willing to suffer delays and nuisances once it has been relieved of them. In a culture programmed for ease, speed, and diversion, friction is the hardest of all sells. The distinguished technology historian Thomas Hughes, having spent decades studying electric utilities, manufacturing plants, and transportation and communication networks, argued that complex technological systems are difficult, if not impossible, to change once they become established. In a system's early formative days, the public has an opportunity to influence how it's designed, run, and regulated. But as it becomes entwined in society's workings and people's lives, as the technology gains momentum, in Hughes's formulation, it resists alteration. Changing the system in any far-reaching way causes too many disruptions for too many people. Society shapes itself to the system rather than the other way around. In the 1990s, when the internet was just beginning its transition from an academic to a commercial network, we could have passed laws and imposed regulations that would have shaped the course of its development and years later influenced how social media works. We could have updated the secrecy of correspondence doctrine for a new era of online communication. We could have applied the public interest standard to internet companies. We could have made the companies legally responsible for the information they transmit. We could have drawn in technological and regulatory distinctions between private and public communication. But none of that happened. It was hardly even talked about. The public's enthusiasm for the web and its apparent democratizing power, an enthusiasm that swept through Congress, the White House, and the Supreme Court, was too strong. Our faith in the benefits of ever more efficient communication overrode any concerns about risks or unintended consequences. We had to keep our hands off the precious gift, as Justice Stevens counseled, for fear our touch might deform it. Now it's too late to rethink the system. It has burrowed its way too deeply into society and the social mind. But maybe it's not too late to change ourselves. Excommunication. One Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1763, in the busy English port city of Harwich, Samuel Johnson conducted the most famous scientific experiment ever undertaken by a man of letters. He kicked a rock. Johnson had traveled to the coast from his home in London to see off his friend and future biographer, James Boswell, who was sailing to Holland to study law at the University in Utrecht. As the two men strolled through the city, walking off their midday meal and passing the time until the departure of Boswell's packet boat, their conversation turned to the doctrine of immaterialism as propounded by George Berkeley, the late Irish prelate and philosopher. Berkeley had argued in his 1710 Treatise Concerning the Principles of Knowledge and Other Works that the world is all in our head. The things that surround us exist only as ideas or sensations in the mind. We bring them into being through our perception of them. Esse est percepi, Berkeley declared. To be is to be perceived. Dr. Johnson, nothing if not pragmatical, found Dean Berkeley's speculations ludicrous. His companion was not quite so dismissive. As the pair paused outside St. Nicholas, Harwich's handsome Anglican church, Boswell suggested to Johnson that Berkeley's argument was an ingenious sophistry. Although it might sound absurd, it was impossible to refute. I never shall forget, Boswell would later recall, the alacrity with which Johnson answered, striking his foot with mighty force against a large stone till he rebounded from it. I refute it thus. To be is to be kickable. The dean's thinking was a little more subtle than the doctor gave it credit for. Later philosophers would dismiss the appeal to the stone as a logical fallacy, but Johnson wasn't attempting to lay out a carefully formulated philosophical argument. He was offering a visceral demonstration of the world's and the body's indifference to such arguments. A mind can spin all the theories at once, but a foot does not have the luxury of sophistry. It is always in touch, sometimes painfully so, with reality. More than a statement of first principles, the world exists independent of what goes on inside our heads. Johnson's act was an expression of humility. To believe that everything's existence depends on one's own perceptions is to put oneself at the center of the universe. Giving a large and very solid object a kick provides an empirical counterpoint to such Ptolemaic egotism. Rebounding from the encounter, the foot is bruised, the rock unmoved. In recent years, as philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and robotics have come into conversation, Dr. Johnson's refutation of immaterialism has become more convincing. A growing body of evidence suggests that our perception of our surroundings depends more on bodily engagement than on cognitive modeling. Analyses of complex human feats, shooting a game bird out of the sky, walking down a steep spiral staircase, taking a sharp turn at speed on a motorcycle, reveal how being in the world is necessary to making sense of the world. Perception begins in presence. Intuition precedes cognition. It might be possible for a dedicated contemporary Berkeleyan to construct an argument involving extended and elaborate mental and rhetorical acrobatics that all our earthbound skills are just mental illusions our minds conjure up for mysterious reasons. But why bother? The world doesn't await our proof of its existence. We demonstrate its existence through our aptitude in doing things in it. Worldliness, more than anything else, is what separates the human animal from the AI machine. The computer scientist Rodney Brooks, drawing on his years of experience in building robots, believes that if artificial intelligence is ever going to rival human intelligence, it can't stay cooped up in supercomputers or server farms. It will need to have an active physical presence in the world. A mind trained solely on representations or models, an LLM's neural network, for instance, is fated to produce derivative and superficial thoughts. A chatbot is good at saying what an answer should sound like, which is different from what an answer should be. The bot's simulation of speech masks the lack of any underlying comprehension or competence. To build a truly perceptive and thoughtful AI, an automaton that can do more than rearrange symbols into new patterns, it's necessary to have its representations grounded in the physical, Brooks continues. It's necessary to have it go out and kick rocks, lots of them. Once a robot begins to learn about the world by exploring the world as a child does, the need for symbolic representation soon fades entirely. Brooks's research points to something elemental about intelligence, its formation, and its tight connection to nature. Quote, "The world is its own best model. It is always exactly up to date. It always contains every detail there is to be known. The trick is to sense it appropriately and often enough." End quote. That's the trick for us humans as well, to sense the world appropriately and often enough. It's a trick we'll need to relearn if we hope to escape imprisonment in the hyper-real. Despite our love of, or at least infatuation with, the easy stimulations of the virtual, We can never make a true home there, at least not without sacrificing the qualities of sense and sensibility that make us most ourselves. Live in a simulation long enough, and you begin to think and talk like a chatbot. Your thoughts and words become the outputs of a prediction algorithm. To argue for a more material and less virtual existence is not to make a case for materialism alone. As the ambitions of Andreessen, Zuckerberg, and the other evangelists of virtual reality make clear, it's virtuality that reduces all concerns to the materialistic. Hyper-reality is all surface and no depth. Beyond the simulation lies nothing at all, as Baudrillard saw. Any attempt to transcend reality intellectually, artistically, or spiritually has to begin from within reality, bounded by constraints of time and space. You can only get beyond the material by going through the material, by suffering and surmounting its frictions. And that becomes harder and harder to accomplish, or even to imagine the more that life is mediated. By mechanisms of communication. The computer is so quick to sense and fulfill our desires that it never allows us the opportunity to examine our desires, to ask ourselves whether what we choose or what is chosen for us is worthy of the choosing. Maybe salvation, if that's not too strong a word, lies in personal, willful acts of excommunication. The taking up of positions, first as individuals and then perhaps together, not outside of society but at society's margin, not beyond the reach of the informational flow but beyond the reach of its liquefying force. The Superbloom gave us a metaphor for the entrancing, fleeting stimulations of the screen. We might borrow Dr. Johnson's rock as a counterweight, an emblem of stability, solidity, resistance. If you don't live by your own code, you'll live by another's. Thus ends Chapter 10 and the text proper of Superbloom. I'm going to read the acknowledgements. It's not very long. It's basically a page and a quarter. Just because I think it's good to get an idea of where this stuff comes from, and that's basically what he tells in the acknowledgement. Just a general sense of where his research, his ideas, so forth come from. So, acknowledgements. The ideas in the preceding pages began to take shape early in 2017 when I wrote an essay for the Sunday Boston Globe called How Tech Created a Global Village and Put Us at Each Other's Throats. But it wasn't until 2019, the year of the Superbloom, that the ideas started coalescing into this book. In the fall of that year, I taught a seminar on social media at Williams College in Western Massachusetts. The undergraduates in the class, all born around the turn of the millennium, were members of the first generation to grow up online. From an early age, they had easy access not only to the internet, but to smartphones, multiplayer video games, app stores, streamers, and myriad messaging and social media platforms. The students held a variety of opinions about the technologies, and they used the hardware and software in different ways, but they made it clear that the constant presence of digital media had shaped them and their relationships in profound ways. It had exerted a formative pressure on their being. Our discussions convinced me that the full story of social media had yet to be told. I am grateful to the students for their honesty, their insight, and their inspiration. I also thank James Nolan, the Washington Gladden 1859 professor of I also thank James Nolan, the Washington Gladden 1859 professor of sociology at Williams, for inviting me to teach at the school. The opening sections of Chapter 2, looking back at that, let's see. Chapter 2 was titled Privacy and the Public Interest. The opening sections of Chapter 2 appeared in a different form in my essay, How to Fix Social Media, published in the fall 2021 issue of the New Atlantis. I am indebted to that journal's editor, Ari Schulman, and managing editor, Samuel Matlack, for their counsel and encouragement. Portions of Chapter 8, which was Machines Who Speak, appeared earlier also in a different form in Beautiful Lies, my 2021 review of Jonas Bendixson's Book of Veles in the Los Angeles Review of Books. I am grateful to Michelle Pridmore Brown Los Angeles Review of Books Science and Technology editor, for her assistance and support. The title of the 8th chapter, Machines Who Speak, is a play on the title of Pamela McCorduck's 1979 book, Machines Who Think, one of the earliest popular explorations of artificial intelligence and still one of the best. Anton Barbacay, the Robert Aird Chair of Humanities at Deep Springs College, read an early draft of Superbloom and offered incisive comments. He also pointed me toward important sources I would otherwise have overlooked. I thank him for his generosity. V.G. Cannon at the University of Rochester and Brett Frischman at Villanova University graciously answered my questions about their work. Finally, I once again thank my longtime editor at W.W. Norton, Brendan Curry. He and his talented colleagues, notably Caroline Adams, made the book better in many ways. And just to wrap up, from my own perspective, as we finish this book, I guess I was impressed throughout the book by the depth and breadth of the research that he did, the many sources he brought into play here, fascinating sources, covering a lot of subjects, of breadth of subjects in depth, a breadth of aspects of this issue and all of these issues. I think of all the books that we've had the Men's Book Club at Wilshire, I guess, 2 or 3 years now. I don't remember exactly when it started, maybe a couple of years. I think this has been the most interesting for me. It surprised me. I wasn't expecting that when I saw the name of it. What in the world's Superbloom about? Of course, the one we did a few months ago about the Kennedy assassination, written by Darwin Payne, who was a journalist at that time who covered the Kennedy assassination, JFK assassination, and who was with us that evening to discuss the book with us. That was fascinating. And I learned some things there, certainly, that I didn't know, although a lot of it I did know, because I've been a Kennedy buff all these years, for 60 plus years. But this one was just all new to me, and put a different perspective on the idea of social media and the internet and our interaction with it and how it's affecting us, as well as the legal aspects of it and all, the future, what the future holds, what we should be afraid of, what we should celebrate. Let me read, before I go, I didn't read these, what some others have said, the blurbs that, the authors put on the back of their books. Jonathan Safran Foer, author of Everything is Illuminated, says, Nicholas Carr is among the most lucid, thoughtful, and necessary thinkers alive. He's also terrific company. Kevin Kelly, co-founder of Wired magazine, or Wired Online, whatever. Nick Carr is our most informed, intelligent critic of technology. Christopher Caldwell, Financial Times, writes, mild-mannered, never polemical, with nothing of the Luddite about him, Carr makes his points with a lot of apt citations and wide-ranging erudition. Christine Rosen, author of The Extinction of Experience. One of Carr's great strengths as a critic is the measured calm of his approach to his material, a rare thing in debates about technology. He is neither a bully nor a nanny, and he has a gift for stating problems succinctly. Daniel Levitin, author of This Is Your Brain on Music. Carr's prose is elegant, and he has an exceptional command of the facts. Clay Shirky, author of Here Comes Everybody and Cognitive Surplus. Nick Carr is the rare thinker who understands that technological progress is both essential and worrying. And that I saw that, that he presented both sides of why this is to be hopeful, reasons to be hopeful, but also reasons to be worried about it and wary of these advances. And I really like the end of the last chapter, where he brings us back to reality and says, if things aren't grounded in reality, then we've lost something. And the virtual reality has no validity unless it's grounded in reality. Sue Halpern, New York Review of Books. There have been few cautionary voices like Nicholas Carr's urging us to take stock, especially of the effects of automation on our very humanness. And finally, Alan Jacobs, author of Breaking Bread with the Dead. Carr has proven to be among the shrewdest and most thoughtful critics of our current technological regime. His primary goal is to exhort us to develop strategies of resistance. And said that he's Alan Jacobs, author of Breaking Bread with the Dead. I really found that chapter interesting, where he spoke about spiritualism and seances and so forth, communicating with the dead. I think there's a lot of food for thought there. Anyway, so that's the end of, brings us to the end of Superbloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart by Nicholas Carr. Thank you for watching.